The dollar in your wallet is not money, it is a promise. And as the last 5 centuries have shown over and over again, promises are always forgotten. Every state tells itself the same unconvincing things, that their currencies will live on forever with them, that their systems are unique, that their power will always carry them forward. The British, the Spanish, the Romans, this is what all of them believed. But these empires were helpless as their money turned into vapor, and with it, the inevitable came. Their sovereignty ended. Today, at the peak of global finance, stand the United States of America. The dollar is everything in international trade, the money every country keeps in its reserves, the standard by which all value is determined. But history has nothing to do with probabilistic thinking. History follows a script, and the script that has brought empires' houses crashing down has now fixed its gaze on the American dollar, like a predator that has caught the scent of weakness. This is not speculation, this is repetition. The same forces that destroyed monetary systems from ancient Rome to modern Britain are gaining strength again. The same mistakes that engraved imperial currencies in bold on the dusty pages of history are being repeated today. The same selfishness that blinded previous powers to their own weaknesses now clouds American decision-making. What you are about to learn will wipe out everything you think you know about money, power, and the future of the global economy. Because these scripts are not just an academic history lesson, they are a real-time collapse in motion. An architecture. If you can understand this, you can defend yourself. If what you prefer is to ignore it, you will disappear, like all empires that believed their promises would never be broken. Scripts always begin with success. Every powerful empire eventually concludes that its currency has become more than just money. Money turns into a concrete metal of trust. Other states accept it not because of what stands behind it, but because of the power backing it. Trade develops through it. Debts are held in its unit. Wealth is hidden inside it. The currency takes its place in the cycle that forms the global economy, and this is exactly where the mousetrap is set. Success brings complacency along with it. The empire begins to chase after its own beliefs. They convince themselves that their currencies are unique, that normal economic laws cannot touch them, that the positions they hold can never be destroyed. They begin to abuse the opportunity that comes with controlling the world economy. This abuse takes predictable forms. They print money to finance their ambitions. Confident that someone will always accept their money, they spend more than they should. They use their dominance over money as a tool of power, forcing others into dependence through financial pressure. By consuming more than they produce, they grow fat and eventually lazy. They mortgage a future they assume will always remain comfortable. But there is no immortal empire. Currencies are not immortal either. The Spanish Empire tasted this pain. When the conquistadors carried sky-high loads of silver from the Americas, Spain thought it had solved its wealth problem forever. More silver meant more money, and, as a result, more power. More power would bring even more dominance. But drowning the world in silver did not create wealth, it destroyed it. Prices rose rapidly across Europe. The Spanish economy bent under the weight of its own treasures. What was supposed to be a privilege turned into a curse that rotted the empire from within. The British Empire did not make exactly the same mistakes, but the result was the same. For centuries, the British pound was the undisputed king of international finance. British banks financed global trade, and British money was present in every major market. London was the financial core of the world, but 2 world wars completely shattered this dominance. To cling to life, Britain turned to heavy borrowing and left its future at the mercy of American creditors. When the bill came due, the empire that had once ruled the cool waters of the world could not meet its debts. The pound sterling became ordinary, and Britain withdrew from the global summit. The French foresaw that revolutionary ideals could not print their way to prosperity. Assignats, backed by the promise of control over church lands, were supposed to bring stability to the new republic. They did not. They created a wave of hyperinflation instead, which wiped out citizens' savings and dragged the country into chaos and deadlock. Revolution devoured revolution, until Napoleon seized power. But even his military vision could not restore trust in French money. The German Weimar Republic thought it could end its problems after World War I with paper. Facing crushing war reparations and economic collapse, the government turned to the money-printing machines. The result was a hyperinflation so severe that people carried truckloads of cash just to buy bread. Savings vanished in an instant. The middle class became history. Social order collapsed, and fertile ground for extremism emerged. Europe's most advanced and powerful economy brought its own existence to an end with its own money. The end of the Roman Empire, which had stood for 1,000 years, was no different. For centuries, the silver denarius was the jewel of maritime trade. There was unshakable trust in Roman coins from Britain to Mesopotamia. But as the empire strained itself defending its endless borders, emperors began to water down the money. They lowered the value of the silver, hoping no one would notice. Citizens noticed, merchants noticed, trust turned to dust, prices hit the ceiling, and Rome's economic structure collapsed. Every empire told itself the same story, that its situation was unique, its power unstoppable. Every time, they were wrong. Now this script has found a new target. For about 10 decades, the American dollar has held global dominance. Since the end of World War II, it has been the world's reserve currency, the foundation of international trade, and a safe haven in times of crisis. American power has carried American money into every channel of the global economy. But power creates privilege, and history shows us that privilege always pulls you backward. The signals are everywhere for anyone who wants to see them. The United States prints dollars not to create wealth, but to finance excessive consumption. Federal debt has already reached levels far beyond the claim of sustainability. Trade deficits have evolved into a permanent feature of the economy. The industrial base that once supported American money with real production has been weakened and moved overseas. Meanwhile, new challengers are revealing themselves. Countries once indexed to dollar-denominated trade are putting alternative projects into action. Central banks that once stockpiled dollars are redirecting their assets into other currencies, gold, and digital alternatives. The financial trump cards the U.S. has used to impose its will are teaching the world how to build defensive walls against dollar dominance. The scripts are speeding up. This acceleration is no longer just a detail. This process is unfolding in the boardrooms of countries around the world, in central banks, and in government chambers. Every month brings a new piece of evidence showing that the dollar's monopoly is cracking. China and Russia are securing huge trade deals in their own currencies, completely sidelining the dollar. Saudi Arabia, America's #1 ally in the Middle East, openly discusses valuing its oil in the yuan. The BRICS countries are building payment systems designed to bypass American financial infrastructure. Even European allies are developing dollar-free trade mechanisms whenever American sanctions make business harder. This is exactly how empires lose their monetary dominance, not with a dramatic crash, but with a slow landslide. As the world quietly builds alternatives, Rome did not wake up one morning to find its money worthless. Spain did not suddenly realize its silver was no longer accepted. Britain did not wake overnight to a rebellion against the pound. The process moves slowly, then suddenly speeds up as trust changes hands and diversity emerges. America's response follows the imaginary strategy every collapsed empire has used: to apply, ruthlessly, whatever worked before. To turn more to the printing presses in order to maintain the illusion of strength, to create financial manipulations to force obedience, to threaten countries that seek alternatives with consequences. But threats are only accepted as long as you have the power to enforce them. And power built on debt and printing presses is much weaker than it appears. The Federal Reserve has printed more dollars in the last 15 years than in the previous 2 centuries. Emergency interventions have turned into permanent policy. Quantitative easing, QE, once unthinkable, has become routine. Interest rates have been pushed down to levels that would deeply disappoint earlier generations of economists. The money supply has risen, while real economic growth has remained stagnant. This is the final act of every monetary empire. When you can no longer create real wealth, you create the illusion of wealth through money manipulation. When your economy can no longer compete, you try to force the world to use your currency. When your rule begins to collapse, you use the privileges you have left more quickly and more harshly. And this only speeds up the process that will erase you forever. Mathematics does not joke. Every dollar printed makes all the previous ones thinner. Debts that are taken on must eventually be repaid or defaulted on. Every promise made by a power that spends more than it should carries the risk of disappearing. The laws of economics do not turn a deaf ear to military power or historical legacy. They concern themselves with supply and demand, production and consumption, value and trust. And once trust is lost, it never fully returns. Foreign central banks understand this better than most Americans. They have watched how the dollar's purchasing power has eroded over decades. They have seen how America's fiscal discipline has disappeared. They have witnessed the financial system being turned into a weapon against countries that do not please Washington. Smart money never waits until the collapse is obvious to everyone. It takes its position before the crowd understands what is happening. The rate at which central banks are increasing their gold reserves has reached levels not seen in many years. Countries are withdrawing the gold they have kept in America for years. The use of cryptocurrencies is accelerating in countries that want to free themselves from dollar dependence. Bilateral trade agreements that leave the dollar out are multiplying every day. The infrastructure for a world preparing for life after the dollar is being built today, quietly but deliberately. However, the deadliest part of this pattern is not technical economic mechanics. It is human psychology. Every empire that has faced monetary collapse believed until its final moment that it was special and different. Spanish kings were sure their silver mines made them invincible. British leaders thought their naval power guaranteed monetary supremacy. French revolutionaries believed ideology could rise above economic reality. German decision-makers believed they could create prosperity by printing money. Today's American elites are repeating the same illusions. When they speak of dollar dominance, they act as though it is not a historical accident but an unchanging law of nature. They try to legitimize fiscal indiscipline under the label of modern monetary theory. They confuse military might with economic invulnerability. They assume that simply because the world has always accepted American money until now, it will do so forever. History does not offer a single example of a monetary empire that recognized its weaknesses in time and changed course. This pattern whispers that such a thing is almost impossible. The privileges of monetary supremacy are highly seductive. The short-term gains from manipulating money are extraordinarily tempting. The political cost of real fiscal discipline is extremely heavy. That is why states continue walking the same path. They repeat the same mistakes and move toward the same inevitable end. The real question is not whether this pattern will continue. It is how fast it will progress, and what will take the dollar's place when its dominance collapses. Because after the money of every fallen empire, a new unit always emerges. The empty monetary space is always filled by another power, and those who control that new system will inherit the very power America is now pushing away. The warning signs are multiplying. Alternatives are coming into the open. The same pattern that has shaped the last 5 centuries is continuing today, almost line for line, and most Americans have no idea what is coming. 5 empires, 5 currencies, 5 collapses. The pattern neither lies nor grants exceptions. Rome's silver denarius, Spain's pieces of 8, France's assignats, Britain's pound sterling, Germany's Reichsmark. Each one steered global trade in its own era. Each one appeared permanent and untouchable in the eyes of those who used it. And each one collapsed when the empire behind it became too arrogant, too brutal, and too convinced of its own invincibility. Today, the American dollar is following the same route. The money printing machines run without rest. Public debt grows into a mountain with each passing day. The world is quietly building alternative systems, even as leaders in Washington behave as though nothing at all is happening. The pattern that has swallowed 5 monetary empires in 5 centuries has now locked onto a new target. What you are seeing is not prophecy. It is a series of examples distilled from history. History does not copy itself exactly, but if you ignore its lessons, it will crush you just as hard. Smart capital does not wait until the collapse is obvious to everyone. It takes its position before the crowd understands reality. The dollar in your pocket is still a promise, but promises that stand only on debt and imagination cannot last forever. Ask the Spanish, ask the British. Ask any society that once believed its money was special and different. The pattern never breaks. Only currencies do they deteriorate, fall apart, and give their place to others. If this has helped you see more clearly what is really happening, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.